I really want to hear your perspective as someone who is in that you're in that world. You've published in academic journals before, and working in academia. I want to get your insider take on where you think the state of academia is today, and what do you think needs to change about academia?
Oh, there's so much stuff. I don't know where to start. So the first thing I would say is everyone's experiences in academia are going to vary, and they're going to vary based on a whole bunch of factors: what field they're working in, their particular personality, their particular department, their particular college or university or whatever place where they're positioned. And there's going to be such variation that you're going to run the whole spectrum of people that are having the time of their lives. Their experience, their personality meshes well with the people around them, and they're at a supportive and awesome university, and they're well compensated for their work, and everything's going great. And then you're going to have people that have nightmare situations, and you're going to have everything in between. So the question is like the preponderance of it, because this would be true of any profession. In any profession, you could have an employer that's really horrible. So it could be good or bad. And maybe there's certain professions where it's awful for everybody, but academia is one where it's going to be really high variance. So that's the first thing. The second is that I do think that there are a bunch of issues that push the average or the median experience quite a bit towards the negative in ways that we could do something about. So what are some of the issues? I think the fundamental problem with the academic environment is the incentive structure. And the incentive structure is basically the question is, how do people get ahead? How do people enter academia? How do they stay in academia? How do they advance their careers once they're there? So how do you get in? How do you stay in? And how do you move up the ranks? And a lot of that is going to be based on a way of evaluating people that I think drives people towards making bad decisions. So we're now dealing with all these scandals of data fabrication and people just lying and ghost authorship, where you put your name on a paper and you're listed as an author, but you didn't really do anything. All of that stuff is because of this term that people have come to associate with academia: publish or perish. People get where they get in academia in large part because of whether or not they are able to successfully get a paper published in what is generally, or at least within their discipline, considered a prestigious academic journal. So academic journals are basically these organizations or institutions whose job is to curate essays or papers or research reports. So their job is they take all of them in, they sort through them, they look at the ones that they'll consider publishing. The rest, they go tell those authors, take a hike. That's a desk rejection. It doesn't even go to any reviewers or anything. The rest are sent out to peer reviewers, other people, colleagues, or people in your field. Those people look over it, they give their recommendation, and then the editor makes a decision about whether to publish it or not. And this whole process can take months or even years at times. And then the different journals are considered, more or less like fancy. It's like this is the it's fancy. Kind of like colleges and universities. Like if you have your degree from Harvard, that's considered more prestigious than if you have your degree from nobody knows where this is university or something. So it's the same thing with the journals, where there's high status journals and low status journals. And then there's even journals where it would be like actively bad for your career to publish in them. They're predatory, or they're corrupt, or they're not good. So there's even ones that, like, you could have a degree from some sketchy university where people know about that. They're going to be like, why do you have a degree from like that totally sketchy university where, you show up and you like write your name down and they give you a diploma. So it's the same sort of thing. So that has become such a factor, in large part because it's so evaluable. It's pretty easy to say, yeah, I have a paper published in Nature, so hire me. Whereas there's so many other ways you could evaluate someone's contributions to the academic world. How good of a mentor are they? How good of an instructor are they? How good of a public speaker are they? How good are they at course design? A person could, in principle, be amazing at designing a really good syllabus or really good assignments, but they're not good in front of an audience. Where are
Mm-hmm.
those people? Those people barely exist. And if they do exist, they get, I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm sure they're out there. And the problem isn't that they don't exist or that their skills aren't valuable. It's their skills are ridiculously valuable. It's really important to have a good course design. That is typically not going to get you much credit in academia. So my problem isn't that it's not out there. It's that it's not valued or appreciated in the way publishing a paper in Nature is. And my whole point is, it's really stupid to act like if you're good at getting papers published in top journals, you're awesome. But if you're good at course design, that doesn't really count so much.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. So we don't credit people quite as much for their instructional achievements, their mentorship achievements, their course design achievements. They're like, there's so many other ways. In certain fields, it'd be great if you're good at designing certain kinds of code that other people could use. If you're good at coordinating and collaborating. What if I'm not so good at doing research, but I am good at the logistical aspects of research and I'm good at coordinating teams? Tough shit. That's not going to advance my career. Not that much. So there's so many other aspects of how a person could contribute to academia, but no, publish in Nature or go away. That is how people are treated. And that's an awful way to treat people. It's an awful way for people to advance their careers because it funnels everybody towards everyone has to be good at this one thing. If you're not good at it, you can leave, go away, or stay an adjunct forever, or never advance your career, or be stressed out all the time. And if you don't do this one thing we're going to credit you for, then forget about it. It's really bizarre. It's like well, I don't need a metaphor. It's not a good way to evaluate people. So the incentive structure is stupid and toxic, and it promotes like bad behavior and stress and just narrowly funneling everybody through this. And then the problem is that I think that academic publishing system is mostly bad in the first place. Like it would be bad independent of whether it was the only incentive structure. And the fact that it's the primary incentive structure makes it even worse. So what could we do to improve things? We need a more holistic way of evaluating people's contributions to their fields. Like simple as that. We just need to stop saying you got to publish, or you don't count as a person in the field. That's stupid. That's just stupid. But what it really comes down to is this incentive structure is a problem. What would we need to do? We need better ways of evaluating people's career advancement. But there are other factors here. I think universities have too much administration, not enough instructors as a proportion. So there's been this huge administrative bloat at universities. I think they're trying to do too much. Everything is like fragmented and segmented, and it's become this big system that I think is moving it away from its original purpose, which was instruction. And I don't like that aspect of it. I think a lot of people have commented on that, which is, it's not to say that there aren't non-instructional roles for universities, but when you have that many people on the bankroll for a university, it's going to spike up the cost. And when you spike up the cost, your students need bigger loans to go there if they can get them. And so that's more exploitative of those students. It's not the university directly doing it necessarily, but the federal government or whatever. And if you create if the broader world says you got to have a degree or we're not going to hire you, then people are pressured into going to universities merely to get these stamps of approval. And then there's going to be a question about whether what they're learning is really valuable. There is work like Brian Kaplan is the book, The Case Against Education, which argues that for the most part, it's not so much that like you improve your knowledge, skills, and abilities by going to college. The primary economic difference, like basically, if you say, how do we explain why people with college degrees make more money than people without college degrees? What Kaplan proposes is that the primary thing is it's signaling certain desirable qualities in people. It's not that they develop them in virtue of doing education. It's just that the education filters for people that had those qualities in the first place.
Right.
And so I don't know how much truth there is to that. There's probably at least some. If you ask people, and this is one point that Kaplan makes. Well, does Kaplan make it? I don't know. I've heard this point somewhere. Maybe Kaplan makes it. Maybe someone else. It's not mine. Is would you rather have a degree from Harvard but none of the education, or the education from Harvard but not have the degree at all, and like no evidence you ever went there? A lot of people choose the first one because they know if you go around and it's like a legit, it's not a fake one, and you go around and you're just allowed to use that, that's going to open doors for you, independent of what the education itself would achieve. So even if we assume the education did you a lot of good, just the paper can do you enormous good. And that should tell us something. It's at least partially signaling. The only question is how much. So there is that problem. And that's again, like the problems with academia is that the academics are integrated into this educational system, which may there may be problems with that. It's integrated into a broader economic system, and there may be problems with that. And then if you span out from there, then things are going to get political and economic in ways where, one, I don't know even a fraction of enough to even say anything that wouldn't be immediately stupid and uninformed about it. I'm already on questionable grounds as it is. I'm not a sociologist of academia. So I'm only speaking from personal experience here and not as a person with a PhD in this topic. So I should have issued that qualifier first. Anyway, that's one of the problems. Is this broad? That's one of the problems. The problem here is a kind of a meta problem. The problem is that all of the problems are integrated into a broader system that itself has independent problems in all these areas that are all interconnected to one another in a bunch of horrible ways. And so that makes solving any one of these problems really difficult because, let's say I say, hey, people should advance their careers in other ways. Okay, well, how am I going to implement that? So I have to go to department administrators at universities and somehow convince them to do this. So, one of them might reasonably respond, okay, so you want us to hire people that are not publishing papers in Nature and Science. And so we're going to be recruiting people that publish in Nature and Science pull in more grant funding. So if we want to keep our department going and we want enough PhD students to keep the lights on, the people need to be getting grants. If we're not using Nature and Science publications as a filter, they're not going to get as many of those grants. We're going to get less money and our status will decline. When our status declines, we could lose accreditation or we could get even fewer grant money. We won't attract as high of quality of students. So if we don't use the signal everyone else is using, we get screwed by that. And so what you have is a collective action problem, which is that even if someone says, look, I agree with you that it would be nice to advance people's careers in these other ways, if I don't use the system everyone else is using, and I try to step outside of it, I just lose. And so what you would need is some sort of coordinated efforts. Good luck with that. I have no idea how to achieve that. That would require massive it would require social, institutional, and political revolutions. I don't even have the faintest sense of how you would achieve those. So I don't know how to solve these problems. I could say, here's what the problem is, don't know how to solve it.
Seizing the means of instruction, I guess.
Well, it's kind of like if you encounter two people at the top of a mountain, the only thing you know is that they're on the top of the mountain. You have no idea what they went through to get there. So it could be one person had someone tied chains around their legs and held their family hostage and said, we're going to throw your family in the ocean if you don't get to the top of this mountain with these chains on your legs. And the other person flew up there in a helicopter. You would know. Now, when it comes to getting a college degree, in most cases, it won't be quite that much of a disparity on the helicopter end because it's very hard to just get the degree at a top university without doing some amount of work. But maybe they got flown 20 feet from the summit and then they climbed the rest of the way. People are going to vary in the kinds of challenges they face, and the degree is not going to tell you that. I don't see a way around that. Maybe there are. Look, there's probably people that could brainstorm and think up ways we might be able to more holistically evaluate individuals. Maybe part of the problem is just thinking that you could know so much about a person from a piece of paper in the first place.
Yeah.
And that maybe that's part of the problem. Problem is, in a lot of cases, other means of evaluating people are not necessarily going to be so effective. So like interviews, the empirical literature on interviews, as much as you might think interviews are super useful and informative, it shows that it tends to crowd out better metrics of a person's success in a particular job anyway. So I'm not convinced interviews are the way to go. So you might say, well, just meet with the person and talk to them and look them in the eye, and then you'll know their true worth. People have they bring all their biases, all their assumptions. People are really crappy at evaluating other people. People might meet me and they might go, I don't like the guy. I don't like his body language. I don't like the way he talks. I don't like him. And well, maybe they're right about that. But setting aside that possibility that they've accurately judged me to not be suitable, just the point is, like, the empirical literature on interviews is fairly decisive that they're not so great in most contexts. So I don't know what to do. I don't know. I don't know what to do about that. What I can do is point out where I think things are, like cases where I am at least a little bit more knowledgeable, or cases where I have looked into it a little bit more, and I could comment on those. So,
well, do you
peer
think
review would
that
be one of these?
Do you think that changes to academia need to start outside of academia, like in the
Maybe,
broader
yeah.
culture?
Yeah, but how do you cause cultural changes?
Yeah.
But some of them should happen within academia. I think the lack of interdisciplinary research and academic journals is ridiculous. So I have there's like 5 journals that would tend, like the Journal of Philosophical Psychology, they'll tend to publish the kind of stuff that I write. But a lot of philosophy journals, I submit stuff and they say send it to a psych journal. I send it to a psych journal. They say send it to a philosophy journal. That's what on earth? That's so frustrating. And yet I encounter this. So a lot of the problems are going to have to come from within. As far as the broader social problems, things are going to get too chaotic, too messy for me to figure out what those differences are. I mean, you are going to get some issues, like if a particular type of degree, there's both a private industry, like private sector jobs and academic jobs, and the private sector jobs are just too competitive and they pay 5 times as much, a lot of the more talented people are going to go to those. And so you're like all the people in the academic jobs will, on average, they're either going to be sacrificing a boatload of money to do what they think is right altruistically, and they're martyring themselves for academia, or they're not going to be as competitive for those private sector jobs. It could be their comparative advantage is academic, but basically, as long as you have an incentive system, it's basically what I'm saying is part of the incentive structure for academia is influenced by the incentive structure outside of academia. So if they were paying every super competitive job that paid every philosopher $1 million to do the job, a lot of your best philosophers are going to go do that job, and it doesn't matter what the job is. It could be watching paint dry, and then you're siphoning away all that talent away from academia. So that's a potential problem. So it could be certain kinds of jobs like medicine. So if you're going to take a job in academia for medical stuff when you could go be like a private doctor, you're giving up money. You just are. You're giving up money, and that sucks. I wish that didn't happen. I don't see a solution to that. What are you going to do? Pay every professor of whatever medical field $800,000? Good luck with that. I mean, look, if there was infinite money from the sky, then go ahead, like equalize the pay. But I don't know enough about the disparities in other fields. There's not like a big private sector for philosophers. You may have seen this meme where like a college student says to their dad, like, or their mom, or I don't even know what's in the image. Hey, I decided to major in philosophy. And then the parent says, oh, great, because they just opened up a philosophy factory down the street. It's like, well, the idea of being, of course, philosophy is a little practical value. Philosophers like to tout like, oh, well, people in bachelor's degrees of philosophy actually have a high median income for the humanities. And that's actually true, but it's not because they're working in philosophy factories. It's just because they end up working in like an office job with their philosophy degree. But like philosophy PhDs, what do you do with that outside of philosophy?
Yeah.
Not a whole lot. Not a whole lot. So, I mean, that's another potential issue, is that we might be overproducing doctorates in obscure academic disciplines, that there's not enough jobs for them. So there's just like, dozens of philosophers for every position that opens. Why would you set up a system that way? Why would you create a system where you're in charge of how many people are in the system? And then you say, hey, we're going to create every year, we're going to make one job position. We're going to train 5 of you to do it. Why would you do that? That's cruel. So you're going to tell 4 people, too bad, go do something else. But the answer appears to be yes. That's the answer. The answer for academia is, yeah, we're going to make more people than can do the job. And then we're just going to tell them, hey, all of you get really stressed out and ruthlessly compete with one another. We're going to let a tiny proportion of you in, and we're going to tell the rest, screw off and go do something else. So what the heck is that? That's ridiculous. And yet that's what academia does for some reason.
You're in kind of a unique position, I feel like, because you have like writings and you have academic writings, you have your Substack, your blog, you've got your YouTube, you've got your work out there in a few different mediums. And I guess which do you enjoy doing the most out of all those? Do you like writing an academic journal article more than doing a YouTube video, or vice versa? Or is it kind of hard to say?
The last one is very easy to answer. I
Okay.
absolutely hate writing academic essays. I hate it. I don't like being in academia. I don't like it. I think it's such a high pressure environment. It's high risk, low reward, high pressure, low, like you don't get a big vacation. You don't get paid very well. It's not easy to advance. Everything is high pressure. Everything is high stakes. Everything is volatile. Your job opportunities are restricted and limited. You're funneled through an administrative complex that is Byzantine and unnecessarily abstruse. The whole thing, it sucks. It's awful. I don't know. I admire people that can manage it, but I think being in academia, I don't like it. And so, this, and look, I'm going to say this publicly. So maybe someone, considering me as a colleague somewhere is going to look at this and go, why would we want to hire someone that doesn't like academia? Well, one reason is that if I'm sticking it out in a job, it's because I want to do that job. But it's also like the fact that I don't like it and I'm sticking it out is because I want to make it better. And if you're only going to keep people in a job that are willing to tolerate it or will blindly just love what they're doing and not think about it or question it, I mean, of all places to do that, it's one thing to have that in like an employee at a job where it's like, you just need the job to get done. But I thought academia had a mission. I thought our job was to advance human knowledge and advance humanity and lead to progress. And if we're going to say people that don't like the current system are not welcome, how can that system ever get better or improve? And how does anybody working within that system think that it's perfect? They might not agree with me that it's as bad as I feel or think that it is, but wouldn't they want someone like me around to counterbalance their optimism? So I think I would, because I don't like it, it's a perfect reason for me to be in it. And I'm not being ironic or silly or unserious about that. I completely mean that. It totally makes sense to go into an industry because you think there's problems in the industry. Absolutely makes sense if you actually want things to get better. So I'm going to stick it out. But yeah, writing an essay for a journal, it's horrible. It's slow. It's boring. I don't trust that system. I don't think it's a good system. Whereas I could go in Substack and write a blog post right now. More people will see it. I could track my view count, and I get more views on a blog post in a week than most published papers will get in the entire course of human history. So the idea that publishing papers behind a big paywall in an obscure journal is a good way to disseminate human information for humanity's consumption is outrageous. It's the opposite of true. It's deliberately shoving it in a file drawer, bringing it all the way to the back of the Smithsonian and locking it away so nobody ever sees it. The idea that academic publication is a good way to share information for humanity is outrageous. It's silly. So blogging, you get to play with ideas. You have a lot more flexibility. You could write in any format you want. I could make it short. I could make it long. I could add pictures. I could add graphs and tables. No one is going to tell me stylistically how I have to write. I mean, a big problem with peer review is it forces everybody to write in a way that's boring and tepid and dry and irritating and slow and is formatted to fit the arbitrary conventions of whatever journal. Oh, you have to use this convention. You have to use that convention. You have all these stupid citations and all this stuff, which, so Lance is saying we shouldn't even bother studying work. No, you'll see my blog posts. I make references when you need them. But a lot of journals will say, hey, there's certain norms and expectations that you have a literature review at the start of every paper, and you have to review the literature for every single paper. Really? I can't make a point without a literature review? No, screw you. You got to have it. So the stylistic homogeneity is just bananas. It's so unnecessary to make papers boring and awful to read, and no one reads them. No one in the field reads them. So we force everybody to do stuff in a way we all hate. It's so ridiculous. Just the whole thing is just so stupid. But we didn't even get into how these papers are selected in the first place, which is peer reviews.
I know you had just posted a video with somebody about that, I think like 2 days ago or something. I didn't know if you wanted to go down that.
I can mention it. Yeah. So
sure. Yeah, go for it.
So the person that I interviewed about this is Adam Mastriani. Adam actually did a similar degree to me in psychology at Harvard, and I think it was about a year ago, wrote a blog post on Adam's Substack, which you should go check out. It's called Experimental History. It's just like, it's about psychology, but it's called Experimental History. There's a cool reason why that I talked to Adam about. I love the name. But Adam wrote this paper that got really, really popular called The Rise and Fall of Peer Review. And it basically said, peer review's time has come and it's time for it to go. It's not, so Adam doesn't have this view that we should abandon peer review. It's that peer review has, by and large, failed to live up to serving its intended purpose, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to view it as the only means by which we evaluate people. So Adam's general view, as far as I understand it, is to let 1,000 flowers bloom and see what happens. Like, let people have the freedom to approach the dissemination of scientific and like, I guess you could say, like, research information in different sorts of ways. And there will be different things that people land on and different systems that emerge. But that we shouldn't have this view that we must have mandatory universal pre-publication peer review for anything. If something is to be considered legitimate, it has to go through the system. And if it doesn't, it's not. And there's no other options for you. And I think Adam doesn't like that restrictive attitude towards how peer review is handled. And yet, that is functionally how it operates. So the way that this works, the peer review system, is if I want to get something peer reviewed, I find one of these journals. Journals cover different topics. I have to have some kind of paper that is about the topics that journal publishes on. I have to meet whatever arbitrary formatting requirements there are, whatever other arbitrary demands that they have. It has to be under 10,000 words, and it has to be more than 6,000 words, and you have to write in this way, in this format, and blah, 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 right? So like, just to give you an idea of the kinds of, so Adam had this experience where this particular journal, they didn't let you say the word years. You had to write capital Y. And like they just demanded you must do that. And it's like I'm writing a sentence where I'm like, it's been 30 years. So you have to write it's been 30 Y. And that's just not how humans write or speak. That's stupid. Maybe if if it's like a history class or something and you need to write stuff on a board really quickly, it makes sense to abbreviate things. But why do that? Like, why screw with the prose of an essay and make it boring and weird, like and sterile like that? So that's the kind of things journals will demand, and they'll often demand a whole bunch of petty and insistent little picky things, and you have to do all of them, or we don't want to look at it. Okay, so I want it published in that journal. I submit it to that journal. It goes to an editor. The editor looks at it. They decide whether it should go out for review or not. Then they'll send it to 2, maybe 3 people. Those people will have a few weeks to look at it, and then they send back reports. The problem is that, and if they approve and the editor approves, then it'll get published, and maybe it'll take a few months, maybe it'll take a year or 2. And then once it crosses that finish line and it's published, the first thing is that this generates the artificial sense that anything that's crossed that threshold has been like anointed as it's like sacred and true, and anything that hasn't is like maybe it's not even science, maybe it's not even real serious work if it hasn't been anointed. So it has this process of like a holy baptism of work that creates the artificial impression for both scientists and I keep saying scientists, but this includes the humanities, like philosophers. So academics, both academics and non-academics, both tend to like they see the gap, like anything that's not peer reviewed is crap. Anything that is peer reviewed is magical and sacred. And the reality is probably that they overlap so much that there's plenty of like blog posts that are way better than published work. And there's plenty of published work that we all know, academics know is hot garbage. It's straight terrible. And I mean, just over and over and over, you run into papers. How did this get published? What? They run into this and no one wants to talk about it. Or maybe some of them do. But like, if we know that that's the case, then why are we treating it as like, all the blog posts and YouTube channel stuff is over here, and all the peer-reviewed stuff is over here, when really they're kind of sitting on top of one another, like 2 bell curves that are mostly overlapping. And at best, the peer review stuff is slightly to the right. So it's like the average is slightly better. That's what I suspect is the truth. Does it have no benefits? No, it probably has some benefits. The question is whether the benefits are worth the cost. So the thing is, the reviewers are almost never compensated. Even if there's been studies showing, even if you compensate them, it doesn't really improve the quality of their reviews. There's no real standards or guidelines for how people have to review. People probably are not going to write, I didn't really read the paper. I was too busy watching the football game, but yeah, whatever, publish it. No one's going to say that, even if that's true, because that would be insane to like make it explicit that you weren't paying attention. So people might make some passing remarks. People are going to probably do the bare minimum at the very least to say that they did the job. They might not always do that, but they'll usually do that. No one wants to totally jettison their reputation with the editor or their profession by being completely unprofessional publicly. So they'll probably do the bare minimum. But you get the whole range from the bare minimum to like 20-page, the most comprehensive reviews. There have been cases where a person like literally runs studies to check things. But I think a lot of people, they don't realize that it's super high variation and it's super duper inconsistent. Reviewers routinely disagree with one another. And you get silly situations, like people have actually tested by taking the same exact article that was already published in a journal. They like change the authors and university affiliations and the title, resubmit it to the same journal, and they like usually don't even notice that they already published it. And they get completely different reviews. So it's like this wildly random system where it's closer to a coin flip than a systematic, rigorous view where people converge. And when you could say, hey, peer review is a little better than flipping coins, how impressed are you with that? Because the answer for me is not much. Adam makes a point that like you wouldn't want a food inspector to just go around sniffing food and then say, it doesn't smell bad, so it's good. Like you wouldn't want, like, would that be useless? Useless. No, because sometimes people say, oh God, this smells terrible. Throw it in the garbage. That you're usually right. If you have a piece of chicken and it smells like garbage, it's probably not fit for human consumption. Fair enough. But what about all the things you're not going to catch? Right. And it's the same thing. You wouldn't want people to use a bad filter, but give everyone the misleading and false impression that it's a good filter. And that is what I think is happening. I'm not saying peer review it has 0% improvement. I'm saying the improvement isn't good enough. There's very little quality control. There's very little accountability. There's very little very little convergence. It's too stochastic, it's too variable, it's too inconsistent. It's going to vary across fields too. So you're going to get variation within fields and across fields. You're going to have all these opportunities for gatekeeping. So a lot of times the editor or the reviewers might not like what you have to say and will want to rule it out for those reasons. A lot of people may have the impression that in science, if I submit a paper, the reviewers like carefully examine my data and they reproduce my results. They don't do any of that. They almost never have your data. Even if they had your data, they're not going to reproduce it. Even if they reproduce it and they get the same results, or if they didn't get the same results, who knows if that would ever see the light of day. So that's all the problems structurally with peer review. Basically, it kind of sucks. It doesn't really work very well. And the ironic thing is there's not a whole lot of peer-reviewed evidence that the peer review system works really well, but its defenders will defend it aggressively and hostilely. They will be really nasty if you question the system, and they'll call you an idiot and they'll talk about how great it is. And they make all these bad arguments. So here's some bad arguments. One bad argument is, well, we don't have anything better. Okay. What if a doctor's method of treating a person for a headache was to hit them in the head with a hammer? And you come along and you say, hey, hitting people in the head with a hammer is not a very effective way of treating a headache. Maybe you should stop doing that. And they said, well, what's your alternative? And you say, my alternative is stop hitting them in the head with a hammer. And they go, well, unless you come up with an alternative, like unless you have a medication, I'm going to keep hitting them in the head. Now, the thing is, it's not a perfect analogy because hitting someone in the head with a hammer is worse than not doing anything. And it might be that peer review isn't worse than doing anything. But I only think that that's true in one respect, which is that I think it does better than chance as a filter for catching errors and ensuring the quality of the research.
I was kind of wondering what you think about cases where people have tried to expose these kinds of problems in the past. And I'm thinking of the infamous Sokal hoax. I'm not sure if you're familiar with. So what do you think about the Sokal papers? Overblown, or do you think he was accomplishing something significant?
I think it accomplishes something, but it doesn't accomplish like a denunciation of academia or peer review. If what happens, if there are certain fields where it's just a bunch of bloviating nonsense, and you're able, like, let's say I think that a particular field is a bunch of nonsense, and the people in it, it's just obscurantist nonsense, and they're all talking nonsense. I could write a bunch of nonsense and get it published in some top journal in that field and no one notices. And then they could say, aha, I tricked you. What does that tell us? Well, it might tell us that a particular academic field is a bunch of nonsense, but it doesn't show us that the peer review system doesn't work. All it would show is that there's a bad filter within that discipline. It doesn't tell us anything about whether like peer review is ineffective or crappy or academia is somehow compromised in math or physics or chemistry. So yeah, it tells us something. It tells us that maybe there's poor filters for meaningful speech in some subfields of academia. I don't think it says much more than that.
What do you do when I'm assuming you've done some peer reviews yourself, right? How do you approach a paper when you sit down and go into reviewing? What do you usually do?
So usually what I do is I look for, sometimes I just get frustrated by like typos and problems with writing that can be improved, and sometimes I'll comment on those. That's not really the main purpose of this, but you might as well improve it while you're as a bonus. So that's all the bonus stuff. Throw the bonus stuff out. The main thing I look for, so I've reviewed papers that are more philosophical and are more in psychology, and you've got to take a somewhat different approach to those. I'm asking this fundamental question. Does this paper provide us with information that's useful? Like, is this a useful thing for people to know about? And if the answer is yes, I tend to lean towards publishing it, unless I think it doesn't say anything useful or valuable, like then it doesn't meet that criteria, or it does meet that criteria, but it's not in a good state. And then typically in that case, I'll suggest to revise and resubmit or change with major or minor errors, depending on the severity. That's pretty common. Very rarely do people read a paper and go, perfect as is, leave it alone. Like, no one does that. So what I'm going for is this adding to humanity's knowledge? Some stuff I don't care about. Novelty. I don't care if the findings of a paper are brand new to humanity. I think that's an absurd criteria. Is it nice if it's novel? Sure. Does it need to be novel? Absolutely not. If a paper is a direct replication of a previous paper, we need that in science. Good. I would almost want to improve that even if the paper wasn't even very good. I guess I think it's important to reinforce that norm. So there's that, but yeah, basically the paper's got to say something valuable, useful, or worth thinking about. I mean, that's fundamentally what I'm after. And I think a lot of papers don't. I think a lot of papers, I'm often taking a big picture bird's eye view, which is conceptually, how does the paper come together? Is there a clear argument here? Is it showing something? And is it showing something? And if so, is it clear what it's showing? If it meets those criteria, then it's gonna be accepted in some form. Like, it needs major revisions, minor revisions. If not, sometimes papers are too convoluted. I don't know what they're saying, or it's unclear if what they're saying is valuable. That's when a paper tends to get rejected. By me, I'm not talking about other people. That's what I do.
Yeah. Well, no, I was just curious how you tend to approach it.
It's really
Um,
variable. One thing I've noticed is that the kind of investment I put in the review is really contingent on where I'm at in life. And I hate that that's true, but if I have 1,000 things to do and I have 5 days left on the clock to review it, it's probably not going to be as thorough as if it's the middle of the winter break and I've got 2 weeks. So that's some variation. I'd be amazed if this is true of other people. I'm happy to admit I've written reviews that could have been a lot better. I have written so I've written reviews that are not very long, they're not very extensive, and they cover what I think are the key points that are essential to the paper. Maybe I'm not right about that. I have seen other reviewers notice things I definitely didn't notice that were more important. So that happens a lot. So I don't always give the best reviews. I often envy what other people wrote in their reviews. But there are occasions where I've gotten so invested in the paper that I write wildly comprehensive things where I dissect the whole paper from beginning to end. What prompts me to do that? I don't know. And it's not always because I find the paper the most interesting. Sometimes I just feel like doing it. And that's the nature of this, is that this is like a side project for people. And so depending on what's going on in my life, I may or may not have the time and energy to do that. So I've written what I think are really good reviews. And then I've written reviews where, yeah, I don't know how much my contributions should be that important to an editor making a decision. Fortunately, I'm not the only person contributing. So it's not always, totally undermining the system. Not that I care about the system that much in the first place. But look, if I'm going to be part of the system, I'm going to do as much as I reasonably can.
did you have any final thoughts you wanted to add to any of those areas that we touched on?
I guess just a final thought, just because we're on the topic of peer review,
Hmm.
is that the problem doesn't just come down to the inefficacy of the procedure itself. It comes down to the institutional, structural, and personal changes the existence of the peer review system creates when you set it up that way. And this is a point Adam Mastriani makes, which is that, if you're going to incentivize certain kinds of publications, a lot of the problem isn't going to be the content of what gets published, but what people never bother to write in the first place. So if you have a reward system where certain research is more likely to get funded than other research, certain research is more likely to get published than other research, certain ideas are more likely to be popular than other topics, people are not going to even begin projects or write about projects or manage to get those projects through publication if they're not on those topics. So when you set up this narrow filter system, the filter can be an ineffective filter, but it can also change the surrounding decision processes people make that even lead to people submitting things in the first place in ways that are bad for progress in science and growth and humanity. And I think that that's a sort of what's insidious about that is that it's an invisible problem for peer review. You're not seeing all those papers that never get published. You're not seeing all those ideas that never make it into print. And that's another problem I see with peer review. And we're not going to do this, but there are yet more problems. And when you start compiling that list of structural problems with what I mean by structure, what I mean is we have this structure in place and it has this cascading set of effects on the whole academic apparatus in ways that I think are quite bad. So I would just say, yeah, that's a problem. So yeah, that's on the peer review stuff. As far as the other stuff, I think it's so far in the past now. I don't know what I could reasonably say about it. Other than I will note something that I think is a little funny. I never actually got to describing my meta-ethical position. I
Would
got
you like
so
to?
sidetracked, I never did. I don't know if it's worth it at this point.
Okay,
So maybe that's something we'll just have to talk about another time. I feel like
sure.
I've run the course on these topics.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to thank you for coming on. I gotta say, I mean, the meta ethics stuff, like I said, is not really in my wheelhouse, but talking to you today and kind of listening to some of your thoughts on these other topics has made me kind of want to dig into that, maybe try and get a better understanding of what exactly these concepts, what's exactly at stake for philosophers and non-philosophers alike in these disputes that are going on. I want to thank you again, Lance, for coming on. I really enjoyed this.
Yep, this is a lot of fun.
And thanks everybody for listening.